Indie comic superstar Robert Kirkman is the belle of the ball as far as the comic book industry. A lot of people would love to be able to replicate his success on The Walking Dead and with Invincible, not only with tremendous comic book sales, but transitioning those titles to other mediums, specifically television and streaming. Obviously, The Walking Dead was a phenomenon unto itself. It feels like that's kind of winding down, but Invincible has been an enormous success on Amazon Prime in the streaming market. And it turns out one of his co-creators is alleging that Robert Kirkman has screwed him out of a very large amount of money. William Crabtree, an artist on the comic book series Invincible, the color artist that is, alleges Kirkman swindled him out of profits by duping him into abandoning his copyright and lost out on profits from the superhero franchise, which is now part of the Amazon Studios animated series. Mr. Crabtree says he co-created Invincible as the color artist for the first 50 issues, and Kirkman in 2005 convinced him to surrender his ownership stake under the guise of making it easier to sell to studios, according to a lawsuit filed on Sunday in California federal courts. This is what attorney Devin McCrae had to say. Fraud and deceit has become a standard business practice for Kirkman and is apparently where his true creative aptitude lies. Now, that is not a very kind statement about Mr. Kirkman and his morals and principles and where his true creative efforts lie. Obviously, he's been tremendously successful in comic books and transitioning things over to television. Now, why Mr. McCrae would have such biting words is because they had already represented artist Tony Moore in 2012, alleging Kirkman tricked him out of his interest in The Walking Dead, and they amicably settled on undisclosed terms in less than 2 months. So now this is multiple allegations against Kirkman that he's screwed over his co-creators as far as future earning potentials and rights to the materials in which they help co-create. Now, I personally have not been in any of the business dealings or meetings of Robert Kirkman with any of his co-creators on any of his projects. And we do see these types of suits happen a lot within the comic book industry. There's not a ton of money to be made in comic books themselves. Where the real money lies is transitioning these stories to other mediums, whether it be television, movies, streaming. And once you have a little bit of success, normally people start coming out and saying that they are owed something. Obviously, in the case of the Tony Moore suit in 2012, somebody, likely an attorney for Mr. Kirkman, decided that settling was probably the best course of action, and they obviously did that. I imagine the attorney, Devin McCrae, is hoping to settle this once again as far as the rights to Invincible. It's a pretty interesting story that he weaves. Crabtree says that he and Kirkman had an oral agreement that granted him 20% of single sale proceeds of Invincible and 10% of any revenue generated from other film or television commercial exploitation of the work, together with any derivative projects based on the work and any allied or ancillary rights in the work. Basically, he was entitled to 20% of all the comic sales, and then any other revenue generated from Invincible outside of comic books, he was entitled to 10%. I will say this up front. If you are a comic creator or you're getting in the industry or you're starting to work out some agreements, I would highly suggest not to do them orally. Obviously, in certain states, an oral agreement is binding, but it is going to be more difficult to prove, and it will take a lot more work and cost a lot more money to get these things worked out in the future if said comic book ends up taking off and being a big deal. So if you're working under an oral agreement, I would suggest pay a little bit of money, get an attorney now, and it's going to save you likely in the long run as far as future profits and earnings and having claims to the rights of the things that you have helped create and fleshing out who is owed what in the future. Back to the story at hand. Crabtree says Kirkman himself approached him at 2005 San Diego Comic-Con and presented him with a certificate of authorship, which purported to characterize all of his contributions as work for hire. That is a key phrase. You will hear work for hire a ton when you see these suits, specifically with Marvel and DC and the estates of long past comic creators and the rights their families are still owed. They want to claim that it was work for hire, i.e. they're only entitled to whatever was in the contract. So Kirkman presented him with a certificate of authorship claiming it was work for hire, and that he said that he was in the final stages of licensing Invincible for television production, and that having it represented by a single creator would increase its commercial viability. Makes sense. It would make the contracts easier to write and all the legal stuff, which of course they're going to have to do to bless the contracts and the agreements to go through if you're dealing it with one person rather than an array of people that are co-creator of the property. And this is according to the lawsuit. Quote, Kirkman falsely told Crabtree that Crabtree's rights and financial interest in the work would remain unchanged if he signed the certificate of authorship, and that the document would simply allow Kirkman to market the licensure of the work more easily, resulting in greater profits for both of them, unquote. So it sounds like, according to Crabtree, that Kirkman sold him a bill of goods, because that is not exactly what happened. We'll get to some of the details here. We have heard of things like this happening. There are rumors, or I don't think they're rumors. I think they're stories. If Marvel wanted a creator the rights to a creator's work, and it was never in their original agreement, what they would do is they would send him a check for a large amount of money, and on the back would be like a contract. When they signed it, not only would they be signing the check so they could cash it, they would actually be signing away the rights to the work that they were receiving the check for life. The deeper you dig into the comic book industry, the seedier and kind of grosser it gets. Obviously, I do not know the details of this, and I'm personally not taking a side, but that is the allegation that is in the lawsuit itself, talking about what Kirkman did and what he had promised. And it does say that after the document was signed, that Kirkman continued to pay Crabtree for comic sales, and in connection with the licensure of the series by MTV for a television-based motion comic, and by Paramount Pictures for a television and film option. So there was a motion comic from MTV, which they made money, and then there were options for a television show and a movie from Paramount, which they obviously got a fee, but never came to fruition because we never saw the show until it came on Amazon. And it says, but when Crabtree learned in 2020 that Amazon Studios was proceeding on a plan to launch a show, Kirkman informed him that he was not entitled to any monetary proceeds because he had no ownership interest in the series. And in the suit, the attorney McRae states, when Crabtree questioned Kirkman about why Kirkman continued to pay Crabtree royalties on the work for years after the certificate of authorship, Kirkman stated that those royalty payments were actually just bonuses that he paid at his discretion. So apparently he was doing him a favor, giving him these bonuses that Crabtree says that he was entitled to, and that they had verbally agreed that he would still continue to get. And it appears that he possibly did until the bigger agreement obviously was signed with Amazon. It is a seedy business. You see these things come up quite a bit. Me personally, I have a lot of respect and admiration for Robert Kirkman and what he has been able to achieve in the comic book industry. He is obviously an executive at Image Comics. The work speaks for itself. The Walking Dead was a phenomenon. We don't normally see indie comics perform at that level for that long. Obviously, it transitioned over to AMC. We got a sequel series out of that. We've also had board games, video games, all spawning out of his Walking Dead series, and it's been an enormous success. Invincible, according to Doc, he said it's the best superhero comic written in the last 10 years. I personally have not read it. Those omnibuses, I think there's 3 of them. They're absolutely damn thick. But people really do love the show on Amazon. It was an enormous hit. I know people are excited for the 2nd season. I personally hope that the details in here aren't exactly true about Robert Kirkman. I do imagine it will be easier and there will be less mud slung at him if he settles this out of court. So I imagine that's probably what's going to end up happening. Obviously, this has already been the case, with the other thing with The Walking Dead in 2012 with the same attorney. I imagine that's what they're going for. Sling a little mud at his name and see if you can get this thing settled out of court, in your favor without having to go through the legal system. Probably some embellishment on the part of the claimant in here, but hey, there's probably some truth in here. And unfortunately, that is the comic book industry, but that is the suit that has been levied at Robert Kirkman, superstar independent comic book creator. I have severe doubts we'll ever get a full accounting of everything that happened, as there will likely be NDA side once this thing is settled out of court. We do know that Mr. Kirkman himself normally has a lawsuit going on, whether it be from him towards AMC or if it's his co-creators at him. So it's just kind of part of the industry. Once you're really successful, whether it be in comic books, television, movies, or whatever, people tend to get litigious when it comes to monies owed, and that makes sense. So those are the details. I personally don't know who's in the right, who's in the wrong. I was not in any of these meetings. I do not know the agreements that Kirkman and Crabtree came to when they co-created Invincible, but it does sound like Crabtree feels like he's owed some of that Amazon money and will likely get it in the not-too-distant future. That's just my guess. If you were a fan of Robert Kirkman and his comic book writing, you likely know that he had some time over at Marvel Comics. He does not speak all that highly of it. I made this video. It's actually quite a bit old. I think it might be a year and a half, 2 years old at this point. But he kind of goes in detail on the way that he was treated by Joe Quesada and the other people at Marvel that he didn't like. And if you like Kirkman, you'll probably like this video.